Hey everyone, welcome back to Dev Parkour. A little bit different scenery today, but in today's video I wanted to talk about Windows Subsystem for Linux and why I am really impressed by it. After a few years of really not getting into it, um, I've actually been using it for the last 2 years, and I have to say it is amazing. It is definitely something that I should have looked into sooner, and I'm going to tell you why in this video. So prior to January of 2020, January of 2020, my primary development machine was a Mac, and I really liked using a Mac because I could basically pull a brand new Mac off the shelf, and in just an hour or two I could be up and running with everything that I needed to use to do most of my primary development activities. I could have PHP running, I could have Python running, I had Git, right? The Xcode tools automatically install Git the first time you try to use it. And that was pretty easy, straightforward, nothing fancy. You had plenty of text editors, and this was even before VS Code came out. I was using a Mac as my primary development machine. But the one thing the Mac couldn't do is Windows development, right? So I was working a Windows job at about this time, and I decided that my next primary machine was going to be a Windows machine. At this point, I had still never used WSL. I think I'd installed it on my work machine, but I hadn't really used it as intensively. I still assumed that Windows Subsystem for Linux was a poor attempt at providing a Linux system for Linux developers. That is not at all what WSL is. WSL is so much more and better than that. And if you try to think of WSL as Linux running on Windows, you're just going to be disappointed and confused, and that you're not going to get the most out of WSL. So when I got my Windows machine, the first thing I did, or one of the first things that I did, was install Windows Subsystem for Linux. And I started playing around with how it actually worked. And its power really comes from the tight integration of the Windows UI, so running Windows apps, Visual Studio Code, Docker for Windows, all of these things, and the Linux environment running on a true Linux kernel in a VM on Windows. And it is a full Linux environment, so it is completely isolated. It's not trying to run, kind of like Cygwin, Linux programs ported to Windows, or Ming32, similar sort of thing. It is a full Linux environment running kind of in a virtualized space, but with some very tight integration with how Windows works. So VS Code, you could run the client bits, the UI that you type into on Windows, and there's a server component that actually analyzes your code, uses your code, does all the language parsing, does the compiling, all of that stuff running inside WSL. So that was really cool. And all of that stuff that I'm describing, actually, it wasn't necessarily there immediately, and I don't think it was all there when I started using WSL. It's kind of come about over the course of the last couple of years, but it still makes WSL super powerful, and it really makes it a game changer. And that's the title of this video. WSL is absolutely a game changer. It means that whereas I used to be able to pull a brand new Mac off the shelf and be up and running in a very short amount of time with all of the development environments I needed, except for Windows development, well, now the same is true for pretty much any Windows machine. I can do the same thing between the stuff that runs natively on Windows, Visual Studio, VS Code, all that stuff running natively on Windows, and everything I can do in Windows Subsystem for Linux. So let's take PHP for instance. PHP is an absolute pain to run on Windows. There are lots of packages that are actually kind of meta packages. They're bundles of usually some sort of server like Nginx or Apache, the PHP bits themselves, and then some sort of database, MariaDB or MySQL, and let's see. Yeah, I guess that's it, all packaged up into one. But you download it and you install it, and several gigabytes later, you now can use PHP on Windows. But it is still PHP on Windows. PHP from the very beginning has been designed for Linux, so there are some very specific weird things that happen when you're running PHP on Windows, just because it expects a Linux system underneath, and Windows at the operating system level behaves differently from Linux. So I like to run PHP in Windows Subsystem for Linux to take advantage of the full, the normal experience of PHP. So that's one example. I'm also running Rust in Windows Subsystem for Linux. I think I might be running Ruby. I think I did that for something. I'm pretty sure I'm running Go in Windows Subsystem for Linux. And all of this is just because, to me, it's a lot easier to manage all of those environments in Windows Subsystem for Linux, rather than trying to maintain where all these files are across my Windows machine. If I really wanted to get super fancy with it, I could actually create a separate Windows Subsystem for Linux instance for each one of these environments. Especially, let's say I was working on a particular project that had a lot of very specific dependencies that I didn't want cluttering up, other projects or something like that. I could spin up a new WSL instance specifically for that project, and if either it got corrupted or I was done with the project, I could just blow it away and it would be gone from my computer, and I wouldn't have all of this cruft left over. Haven't done that yet, but that's something that might be cool to check out in a future video. Long story short, WSL is really cool. It's opened up a lot of possibilities. Technically, the pendulum has kind of swung the other direction. I can't develop Mac apps on my Windows machine. However, I do have a Mac, and obviously I could just pull it out and develop Mac apps, iPhone apps, that sort of thing natively on the Mac. But Microsoft has worked so closely with that whole ecosystem that if you're using Xamarin, which is kind of my go-to for mobile development these days, you can actually remotely connect to a Mac. So either I could run a Mac in the cloud. Amazon has an offering that's actually kind of expensive, but the way they do it is basically it's a Mac Mini plugged into their infrastructure, so you're paying for a full Mac Mini. There are some other platforms that do like Mac as a service sort of thing. They're a little bit cheaper, but from what I've heard, the performance is not as great. Or like I have a specific Mac. I have my own Mac that I can just connect to remotely. So before I moved, I actually had that set up. It was connected to the Wi-Fi. It was set up next to my desk, and my Windows machine would connect to it remotely. I could develop on my Windows machine, and when it needed to build something on the Mac, it would send it over to the Mac, build it, bring it back to the Windows machine, and this is all, completely out of my hands. It's completely automatic. It's built into Visual Studio. It's a really great experience. If you're interested in seeing that, I can definitely show that in a future video. The app that I built with it is super simple. There's nothing terribly complicated with it. So that would be a pretty quick, straightforward video. Let me know in the comments if that's something you'd be interested in seeing. That's not WSL specifically, but it kind of, WSL definitely opened the door for me to think seriously about using a Windows machine as my primary development machine. Looking forward, will I stick with Windows? It's actually a very good possibility. I really like what Microsoft is doing with Windows. I really want to see Windows 11. Ideally, I'd be able to see that on my current machine before I commit to buying another Windows machine into the future. But there are some really good Linux laptops as well that I'm kind of toying around with. So obviously with Linux, I don't get some of the nice features that I just described, the integration between Visual Studio and the Mac side of things. Obviously I can't build Windows apps on Linux, but you know, I'm still evaluating. I'm not ready to get a new development machine just yet. That's probably at least a year in the future, depending on how my disk space on my current machine holds up. I think I mentioned that in previous videos. But in the meantime, I think I'll probably create a Linux development environment in the cloud, and that I will be recording video of the entire process. So stay tuned for that, coming up here in a few weeks, I think. So I'm excited to do that. It'll be a little bit of more sysadmining work, and I think it'll be really cool for all of you to see my build of a Linux dev environment in the cloud. So that's it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. Let me know your thoughts on WSL, if you've used it, if you want to use it, if you're curious if it can do X, Y, or Z. Leave a comment down below, leave a question. I'm more than happy to respond to them. I really enjoy responding to the comments. It's one of the true joys of being a YouTuber is getting to read all the comments that come in. Whether they agree with the video, disagree with the video, it's nice to see what you think and have a chance to have more of a dialogue than just, you know, talking to the camera all the time. So leave a comment down below. I think I mentioned that already. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes out. And with that, I'm going to sign off. Have a great day. Have a great Thanksgiving. This is the last video that's coming out before Thanksgiving here in the US. So if you celebrate Thanksgiving, have a great Thanksgiving. If you don't celebrate Thanksgiving, have a great weekend. And I'm excited to see you all again next week.